I woke up to the sound of glass shattering. It was 4 a.m. My heart was beating fast as I hurried out of my room. "I hate you! I don't want you in my life, you jerk!" I froze. That was my mom's voice, but she didn't normally sound like that. My parents often fought, but this time it was different, and it scared me. "Goodbye, George!" she shouted, and I heard the front door slam. Wait, did she actually leave? I ran downstairs as fast as I could. "Mommy, please don't leave!" I screamed as I opened the door. She was already in the cab. I was sure she'd wait for me, but she didn't. Our eyes met as she gazed at me through the window, and in just a few seconds, she was gone. Watching the cab leave seemed like a dream. Everything was moving in slow motion, and my vision started to go dark. Suddenly, I felt my dad's arms holding me as I fell down onto my knees. He was shaking uncontrollably. We held each other tightly until the sun came up. "Mila, are you awake? I'm asking a simple question. Why does a mother bear hide her children from their father?" My teacher was angry. There was silence. I didn't want to answer. "I don't know, ask someone else," I shouted. The whole class stared at me in shock. I stormed out and slammed the door behind me. I knew I was getting detention, but that was the least of my worries. I was seeing the flashbacks. The memory of the last day I'd seen Linda began haunting me once again. I blamed Jason for it, my boyfriend who's always pushing me to talk about my feelings. He kept nagging me to tell him what had happened until I had enough of it. To be honest, I couldn't reveal to him that my own mother had left me 10 years ago without so much as a goodbye or an explanation. So I lied and told him she had passed away from a disease. Jason seemed to pity me, but his sorrow meant nothing. Even if I told him the truth, he wouldn't realize how I really felt, abandoned. I waited outside for my driver, Andrew, to come pick me up. Andrew was like a father to me. He always listened to my problems. Sometimes it felt like we had a better relationship than the one I had with my dad. As soon as I got into the car, Andrew informed me that my father wanted to have a talk with me. It seemed strange as my dad never asked to have a talk, not even when I did terrible things at school. When I walked into the living room, my father looked devastated. "Hey Dad, did the school call?" "I swear I can explain," I started nervously. But then my father covered his face and started to cry. Feeling really worried now, I asked him what was going on. His reply completely shook me. "Mila, it's Linda. She's back and she wants to take you away from me." Completely taken aback, I just stood speechless as Dad went on to explain that she had finally filed for divorce after 10 years and was demanding full custody of me. The world felt like it was spinning. My mother? That's impossible. Why now? I clenched my teeth. I hated her guts. I went over to my dad, and even though it felt a bit awkward, I hugged him and promised that there was no way I would ever abandon him to go live with her. "You're my only family, Dad. We'll get through this together." The date for the divorce trial arrived. My father and his lawyers had prepared me well on what to say. I wasn't really nervous about going to court, but the idea of seeing Linda after 10 years kept me on edge. What would she look like now? Would I be able to recognize her? I was going to keep hating her, of course, but a part of me was kind of excited to see her. When I went inside the courtroom and looked around, she wasn't there. I thought she'd show up at some point, but she didn't. It was just the lawyers. I couldn't believe that she'd be this heartless. After 10 years, she didn't even make the effort to show up in court. As the trial went on, things just got worse. Linda's lawyer claimed that my dad was an unfit parent who kept my mother away from me by force. They also claimed that my father was involved in some serious illegal activity and should be in jail. On top of that, they made it very clear that they had evidence to prove it. After the court session, I was shocked when my father pulled me aside and admitted that he had stolen money from his company. It was a long time ago, but it could still send him to jail. He went on to say that he only started doing those things because Linda had left him. Life had been so cruel to him, and he had temporarily stopped caring about right and wrong. "I'm not proud of it, but it was your mother's fault," he said, looking ashamed and avoiding making eye contact with me. It's okay, Dad," I stuttered, with tears in my eyes. "I can't judge you for what you had to go through. I will stay by your side and help however I can." My dad went silent for a while, but then he said, "There's actually something you could do." "There is?" He told me that Linda's lawyer had suggested that I spend the week with her, and if I agreed to it, I could help my dad find the evidence she had against him. I immediately agreed, even though it kind of scared me. Spending a week with the mother I hated sounded like a trip to hell. But I had to save my dad. As soon as we got home, I packed my bag and sent a message to Jason telling him I would be away for a few days. Linda sent a cab to pick me up, and apparently she had moved back to the city. When I arrived at her house, I was shocked to see that she was staying in a huge villa. My heart stopped for a second when I saw her waiting for me outside. I hated to admit it, but after 10 years, she still looked beautiful. She greeted me with tears in her eyes and said, "Welcome home, honey." She hugged me tightly for a very long time, All I could think was, if she missed me that much, she should have shown up a little sooner. Linda showed me around the house as she explained that we'd have a lot of time to argue about the past. For now, she just wanted us to relax and get to know each other. I mean, sure, let's just skip over the fact that you were gone for 10 years and act like a normal mother and daughter, I thought, but didn't bother to argue. I was here on a mission, to get rid of her for good. The next few days were a bit of a nightmare. I wanted a little time by myself to snoop around the place, but my mom was stuck to me like a magnet on a fridge. Every time I thought I had a chance to look through a drawer or closet, there she was with a tray of freshly baked cookies, asking me to come try one while they were still hot, or asking me to go on a walk with her, as it was such a lovely day. It was always one thing or another. The only option I was left with was to try looking for the documents at night when she was asleep. On my third night at her house, I crept out of my room and looked down the corridor. The room and her light was off. Good. I quietly went down the stairs and headed straight to the library. I was really hoping I'd find a folder or something there. As soon as I turned the doorknob, oh my God, make that terrible screeching stop! I just stood there completely in shock as alarms blared all around me. In a matter of seconds, my mom had come running down and switched all the lights on. She had a baseball bat in her hand, and she looked pretty scary. "Mila, oh thank God, I thought it was a break-in," she said as she lowered the bat. I stammered, trying to think of something quickly. I couldn't sleep. I thought I'd just come downstairs and grab a book to read. "Don't do that again, Mila. It would be better if you didn't leave your room at all at night," she said in a quiet voice. I just nodded and headed off to bed without saying another word. Okay, that was really creepy. Other than the fact that I was completely failing at my mission, I eventually found myself having a good time with her. I didn't want to like her, but I couldn't help myself. She was charming and funny. It would have been nice growing up with her around. The thought made me really angry too, and gave me the urge to confront her, but it wasn't the right time. My father was my priority, and I had to stick to the mission. On the last day of my stay, I was very nervous. My time here was about to end, and I still hadn't found the evidence. "Mila?" I jumped as Linda shouted from upstairs. "Can you get me some shampoo? I'm in the shower." I went into her room and handed her the bottle from behind the door. But as I was heading out, I noticed something that looked like a folder peeking out of the drawer near her bed. My eyes widened as I opened it. These were the documents I'd been looking for all week. I grabbed the folder and hurried outside with my packed bag. Andrew came to pick me up in seconds, and he started asking questions, but I refused to tell him why I was upset. I stared at the house with tears in my eyes as he drove off. I would have had a nice life, if only it were real. When I arrived home, my father greeted me with the joy of victory. "You're my little hero," he said as he looked through the documents I gave him. After my return, the court arrangements stopped abruptly. Linda knew that I'd taken the evidence, and she had nothing to go to court with. Now that my father was safe and my manipulative mother was no longer an issue, I thought things would be different between my dad and I. But I was wrong. The truth was, I couldn't blame him. How could he love me when I reminded him so much of her? After a few days, I was unpacking the bag I had with me at Linda's when I noticed an envelope inside. I opened it with shaking hands as I read my mother's words. "Dear Mila, in case we part ways before I get a chance to speak to you, I want you to give me one last chance. Go to your father's office. He has a secret drawer near his desk on the bottom left side. That's where he hides all of his secrets. You must remember, there are two sides to every story. Love, Mom." My heart started racing. How did she slip the note inside my bag? Suddenly, I heard loud knocking at the front door. Oh God, it was her. "Open the door right now." You scared the hell out of me," I shouted at Jason as he walked in, looking a bit angry. "I scared you? You're the one who disappeared for 2 weeks. What is going on with you?" I handed him the note and confessed that my mother was alive. His jaw dropped. I promised I would explain everything, but first I needed his help in finding my dad's secret drawer while he was still out. We both went to my father's office. We looked around for the secret place for a long time before we found it. What we found was shocking. Hundreds of old envelopes with my name on them. The envelopes seemed as if they belonged to a fake magazine subscription. As soon as I opened one, I found that they were secret letters from my mother. Quickly, I took everything out of the drawer and we ran to my room. I quickly told Jason everything about my past and what had been going on lately. As I started reading the notes, I couldn't stop. There was so much information to process. I started to understand a lot of things. How my mother was kicked out of the house, how my dad forbade her from ever contacting me, and how he even threatened her and demanded that she move to another state. She had left him after she found out that he was embezzling money. She wanted me to go with her, but my father was a very powerful man, and he knew dangerous people. She couldn't do anything about it. Just then, I heard a loud knock on my door. It was my dad. Quickly, I slid all the notes under my bed and pretended to kiss Jason. I needed to hide what I was actually doing. My dad opened the door and said angrily, "What is this?" I moved away from Jason and saw to my horror that my father had a letter in his hand. We must have dropped one by accident. My father smiled, and I felt a shiver down my spine. "You stupid girl. You just opened the gates of hell. Don't talk to her like that," Jason warned him. My father started laughing like a lunatic. "At least I can tell you now how much I hate you. You're just a copy of your terrible mother. I guess it's time that you know that the only reason I've kept you around was to make her suffer." I stood still as a statue as I tried to process what was happening. I remembered the way he was crying when Mom left. That was all an act? Jason grabbed my hand and said, "Mila, grab your stuff. We're leaving." I gathered my things quickly. I wasn't going to live with this monster anymore. I didn't even know who he was. "You can't leave," he laughed. "You're still in my custody. I'll have the police bring you back soon." He stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, blocking our way. "It's too bad that you think the police will return her to a monster like you," Jason said, shoving him aside as we stormed out. Jason's car was outside. We got in fast and drove off. "This isn't over," my dad shouted. Shocked at what had just happened, I hugged Jason and told him I was sorry he had to witness all this drama and that I wished I'd told him the truth sooner. He wiped away my tears and said he was just glad he'd helped me get out of my evil father's clutches. Jason dropped me off at my mother's where she was waiting at the door, as if she were expecting me. I went inside quickly. My whole body was shaking. My life was a lie. For 10 years I despised my mother, while the real enemy was him. "He's gonna come for me, Mom," I said, shivering. "I know him. He won't let it go. He's gonna hurt us both, Mom." I was scared to death. "I won't let him, honey. I've been preparing for this." She held my hand tightly. Life with him was a nightmare from the start. Not only was he cheating on me, I found out that he was a criminal and a very dangerous man. I started to secretly gather evidence against him, but when he found out, I had to leave. I always wanted to come back to you, but he always had people looking for me to find the proof I had and destroy it. I was always on the run. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I had no idea you—" Before I could finish my sentence, the house alarm went off. "He's here," my mom said calmly. I hurried to call the police, but it was too late. My dad had already broken in with 2 of his men. "Oh, Linda, it's such a pleasure to finally see you after all these years. Boys, why don't we give her a nice welcome gesture, eh?" The 2 men grabbed my mother by the arms. "I'm not scared of you if that's what you think," my mom said, daring him. My dad came closer to her, smiling. He placed his hand gently around her neck and said, "You know what I'm capable of, Linda. Don't test me." "What if I do?" she said with a smile. My mother was acting insane. "I will finish you," my father said, not smiling this time, as he started to tighten his hand around her neck. "Father, no!" I cried while trying to get him off of her, but he was too strong. All of a sudden, everything went completely dark, and I felt my body hit the floor. I saw Andrew coming in before I lost consciousness. "Hey, honey, are you okay?" my mom said with her soft voice. "She's alive, but how?" I looked around, and the police officers were all over the place. My father and his men were nowhere to be seen, and one of the investigators was speaking with Andrew. "What is Andrew doing here?" I asked. "Did you really think I would leave you without making sure someone was watching over you?" Mom said. Andrew looked over at us. "Glad to see you 2 back together," he said with a wink. I was speechless. The only thing I could do was hug my mom and cry. I was so glad she was okay. Andrew came along and joined us. I couldn't thank him enough for what he did for me. As for my father, he was going to be behind bars for a good long time. If he were to come back for revenge one day, my mom and I were strong enough to face him. He didn't scare me anymore, but I do know him well. He said this wasn't over, and he's a man of his word.